echoed through Ashcroft Manor before anyone dared breathe. A velvet jewelry case lay overturned across the polished marble floor. Diamonds scattered like frozen stars beneath dozens of trembling candle flames. Two royal guards held a young servant by her wrists, while nearly every noble guest in the ballroom stared as though they had already witnessed her conviction. "Search her apron." The command came from Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, the Duchess herself. Her voice was cold enough to silence an entire room. One guard reached into the servant's pocket. A gasp swept across the ballroom. The Duchess's sapphire necklace, the priceless heirloom worn by generations of Ashcroft women, slid into his gloved hand. "There it is." The whisper spread faster than wildfire. "I knew it. Servants always become greedy." Imagine stealing from the Duchess herself. The young woman stood perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not beg. Her pale hands shook, but her voice remained steady. "I didn't take it." No one listened. The Duchess turned away in disgust. "I welcomed you into this house. You repaid my kindness with theft." The guests nodded in agreement. The guards tightened their grip. Then, a deep voice thundered across the ballroom. "No one leaves." Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Standing beneath the grand staircase was Duke Adrian Ashcroft. His expression wasn't angry. It was dangerous. His icy blue eyes scanned the room, not the servant, everyone else. He walked slowly across the marble floor until he stood before the trembling young woman. "What is your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Clara, Your Grace." He looked directly into her frightened eyes. "Did you steal these jewels?" "No," she answered without hesitation, without looking away, without breaking. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then he slowly turned toward the guards. "Release her." Silence. Absolute silence. Lady Beatrice frowned. "Adrian, you found the necklace in her pocket." The Duke never looked at his wife. Instead, he stared at the ballroom filled with noble families, wealthy merchants, trusted servants, and relatives. Someone inside this room had planted the evidence. He could feel it, because one detail made no sense, and whoever framed Clara had overlooked it. His voice became even quieter. "Lock every door. No one leaves this manor until I find the real thief." Everything exploded into chaos. Before we uncover how one servant girl became the center of the greatest scandal Ashcroft Manor had seen in decades, before a respected noble family nearly destroyed itself from within, we have to return to where it all truly began, 3 weeks earlier. If you enjoy stories filled with mystery, impossible choices, and justice that refuses to stay buried, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable tale. And while you watch, tell us in the comments, if everyone around you believed you were guilty, would you keep fighting for the truth or walk away and start over? Now, let's go back to the day Clara first stepped through the gates of Ashcroft Manor. Gore rain had turned the roads outside London into rivers of mud. Clara Bennett held the worn leather strap of her small traveling bag so tightly her fingers had gone numb. Everything she owned fit inside it. 2 dresses, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, a tiny wooden horse carved by her late father, nothing more. At 22 years old, Clara had already buried both parents. Her father, once a respected cabinet maker, had died after a wagon accident crushed his leg. Infection claimed him weeks later. Her mother survived only 2 winters after that, weakened by illness and years of hardship. When the landlord sold the cottage, Clara had nowhere left to go, until a letter arrived. Ashcroft Manor required another housemaid, food, shelter, honest wages. It felt less like an opportunity and more like the last door left open. The manor itself looked like another world. Grey stone walls rose above sweeping gardens despite the rain, and tall windows reflected the stormy sky like sheets of silver. Clara paused at the gates, taking one slow breath before stepping forward. Inside, the household moved with practiced precision. Footmen crossed hallways carrying polished trays. Maids hurried with fresh linens. Every clock seemed to strike on time. Every servant knew exactly where to stand. Clara, by contrast, felt as though every eye measured the patches on her dress. Mrs. Agnes Whitlow, the stern but fair housekeeper, met her in the entrance hall. "You are Clara Bennet?" "Yes, ma'am." "You can read?" "Yes." "Write?" "Yes." Mrs. Whitlow gave the slightest nod. "Good." His Grace values competence more than flattery. It was the closest thing to encouragement Clara received all morning. By evening she had already scrubbed fireplaces, polished banisters, and memorized half the manor's endless corridors. Her muscles ached, yet she felt grateful. She finally belonged somewhere, or so she believed. Not everyone welcomed the newcomer. Among the servants, one woman watched Clara with quiet irritation. Margaret Hensley had worked at Ashcroft Manor for nearly 12 years. She knew every secret passage, every hidden cabinet, every noble's habits. Most importantly, she expected to become assistant housekeeper once Mrs. Whitlow retired. Then Clara arrived, young, educated, calm under pressure. Within days, Mrs. Whitlow began trusting Clara with inventory records because her handwriting was neat and her arithmetic flawless. It was a small responsibility, but Margaret noticed. Jealousy rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes, it smiles. "You've done well today," Margaret told Clara one afternoon while folding linens. Clara smiled back. "I'm still learning." "Oh, you'll learn quickly." There was warmth in Margaret's voice. Only later would Clara understand how carefully that warmth had been rehearsed. A week passed, then another. Little by little, Clara earned the respect of nearly everyone she met. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never gossiping, never complaining, and never taking credit for work that belonged to someone else. When an elderly kitchen maid slipped while carrying a pot of stew, Clara caught it before it spilled and helped the woman to a chair without waiting to be asked. When one of the stable boys struggled to read a letter from his brother serving in the Navy, she read it aloud with patience, smiling as tears of relief filled the boy's eyes. People remembered acts like those, not because they were grand, but because they were genuine. Even the Duke noticed. Adrian Ashcroft was not a man who spoke unnecessarily. Since inheriting the title after his father's death 5 years earlier, he had gained a reputation for fairness rather than charm. He greeted servants by name when he knew them, expected discipline from everyone, and disliked displays of arrogance no matter how noble the family. One crisp autumn morning, Clara was dusting books in the manor library when the Duke entered unexpectedly. She immediately stepped aside and lowered her gaze. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace." Instead of passing her, he stopped beside one of the shelves. "You've arranged these differently." Clara hesitated. The history volumes were mixed with the law books. "I thought it might save time if they were grouped properly." He looked at the shelves for several seconds. "You were right." Then he simply walked away. It lasted less than half a minute, but from the second-floor balcony above, someone had been watching. Lady Beatrice Ashcroft. The Duchess said nothing. Her expression revealed nothing. Yet beside her stood her younger brother, Nathaniel Harcourt. A charming smile rested on his lips as he observed Clara below. "Interesting girl," he murmured. Beatrice answered without taking her eyes from the library. "She is only a servant." Nathaniel's smile lingered. Sometimes servants notice things nobles overlook. Neither sibling realized how prophetic those words would become. Far below, Clara returned to dusting shelves. unaware that invisible lines were already being drawn around her, and that somewhere within Ashcroft Manor, a plan had begun to take shape, one that would soon place her reputation, her freedom, and even her life in jeopardy. The rain had stopped by morning, but inside Ashcroft Manor, another kind of storm had begun to gather. At first, Clara noticed only small things, conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Servants who had once smiled now offered polite nods before hurrying away. Margaret Hensley, however, seemed kinder than ever. "If you need anything," she said one afternoon while polishing silver in the servants' hall, "don't hesitate to ask." Clara smiled gratefully. "You've already helped me more than anyone." Margaret returned the smile. "I know how difficult it is to be new." Behind the warmth in her voice hid something Clara could not yet recognize. Across the manor, preparations for the Duchess's annual autumn charity ball had begun. It was the grandest event on the Ashcroft calendar, drawing aristocrats, military officers, judges, wealthy merchants and members of parliament from across the county. For 3 days the household worked without rest. Fresh flowers arrived by wagon, crystal chandeliers were lowered for cleaning, silver was polished until it reflected faces like mirrors. Every servant received new assignments. Mrs. Whitlow gathered everyone in the servants' hall. The Duchess's sapphire collection will be displayed before the evening banquet. No one enters the East Gallery without authorization. Only myself, Mr. Collins, Lady Beatrice, and the Duke possess keys. Everyone acknowledged the instruction. Everyone, except Nathaniel Harcourt. He leaned lazily against the doorway, smiling as though the rules existed for everyone except him. "Surely family members don't require permission." Mrs. Whitlow bowed politely. "As you wish, sir." Nathaniel laughed softly before strolling away. Clara noticed the exchange but thought little of it. She had no reason to suspect the Duchess's younger brother. Few people ever did. That evening, Clara was assigned to help catalogue decorative items arriving from London. While carrying inventory records through the West Corridor, she heard raised voices coming from the Duke's study. She had no intention of listening, but one sentence stopped her in her tracks. "You've lost nearly £40,000, Nathaniel." His voice, usually smooth and playful, now sounded desperate. The Duke answered coldly, "I paid your debts twice already." "It was an investment. It was gambling." Silence followed. Then Adrian spoke again. "There will not be a third rescue." Clara quietly continued walking before anyone noticed her outside the door. She never repeated what she'd heard. She believed private conversations should remain private. Unfortunately, someone else saw her leaving the corridor. Nathaniel. Their eyes met for only a second. His pleasant smile returned instantly. But something behind it had changed. He now knew Clara had been close enough to hear. Later that week, another strange incident unfolded. Mrs. Whitlow frowned while reviewing the household inventory. 3 silver serving spoons are missing. The kitchen staff searched every cupboard. Nothing. By evening, the spoons mysteriously reappeared inside a cabinet no one remembered using. "It must have been misplaced," someone suggested. Mrs. Whitlow wasn't convinced. Neither was Clara. The cabinet had already been checked twice. Still, the matter seemed too insignificant to pursue. Life inside the manor moved on. Only the audience of fate understood what had happened. Someone was quietly testing whether stolen objects could disappear, and then conveniently be found. 2 days before the ball, Clara received another responsibility. Mrs. Whitlow handed her a leather ledger. "I want you to verify deliveries in the East Gallery." "Me? You've proven trustworthy." Margaret lowered her eyes. Just for a moment, long enough to hide her disappointment. The East Gallery contained portraits of 8 generations of Ashcroft ancestors. Sunlight poured through towering windows, illuminating glass display cases filled with historic jewelry. The centerpiece rested beneath a velvet cover, the Ashcroft sapphire necklace. Legend claimed it had survived wars, fires, and political revolutions. Its deep blue stones shimmered like captured midnight. Clara admired it only briefly before returning to her ledger. She checked every seal, every signature, every delivery. As she prepared to leave, she noticed something odd. One display case lock bore fresh scratches around the keyhole. Not large scratches, tiny ones, as though someone unfamiliar with the lock had tried opening it. She reported it immediately. Mrs. Whitlow examined the case. "It still locks." "I know," Clara replied, "but someone forced something against it." Mrs. Whitlow nodded thoughtfully. "I'll inform His Grace." From the upstairs landing, Nathaniel watched the conversation unfold. His expression darkened. That evening, Duke Adrian personally inspected the gallery. He crouched beside the damaged lock. "You're certain you noticed this today?" "Yes, Your Grace." "It wasn't here yesterday?" "No." He gently ran one finger across the metal, then looked toward the windows. "Interesting." "Very interesting." Most people would have focused on the scratches. Adrian looked elsewhere. The window overlooking the rose garden had been unlocked, only slightly, barely noticeable. Someone wanted investigators looking at the cabinet, not the window. He quietly relocked it himself, without telling anyone. The Duke began observing instead of accusing. It was a habit learned from his father. "Truth," the old Duke often said, "becomes frightened when chased. Lies become confident." Adrian intended to let the liar grow comfortable. Meanwhile, Clara became increasingly uneasy, not because of the gallery, because people had begun asking strange questions. One maid wondered whether Clara had family nearby. Another asked if she'd ever handled expensive jewelry before. A footman joked that poor people must dream about fortunes hidden in noble houses. The comments sounded harmless, until they kept happening. Someone was shaping opinions, one conversation at a time. 3 nights before the ball, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked into the servants' courtyard for fresh air. Voices drifted from behind the stable. She recognized them immediately. Nathaniel and Margaret. "Everything is prepared," Margaret whispered. "It must happen during the ball." "It will," Nathaniel replied calmly. "And the girl? Everyone already trusts me more than her." Clara's heartbeat quickened. Before she could move closer, a horse neighed loudly. The conversation stopped. Footsteps approached. Clara hurried back inside before anyone saw her. She spent the rest of the night wondering. Prepared for what? Which girl? Was Margaret speaking about someone else? Or her? The following morning brought another surprise. Lady Beatrice summoned Clara personally. The Duchess rarely spoke directly to servants. Clara entered cautiously. "You wish to see me, Your Grace." Beatrice stood before an enormous mirror while her ladies adjusted a new evening gown. Without turning around, she asked, "How are you settling into the household?" "Very well, thank you. I've heard positive reports. I'm grateful for the opportunity." Finally, the Duchess faced her. Her expression was unreadable. "My husband seems impressed with your diligence." Clara hesitated. "His Grace has always treated every servant fairly." Beatrice studied her face carefully. Looking for something? Pride? Ambition? Deception? She found none. "You may go." As Clara left, Beatrice remained staring after her reflection. Something about the young servant unsettled her. Not because Clara had done anything wrong, because Adrian rarely complimented anyone. That evening, the Duke requested the inventory ledgers. He reviewed every entry personally. One line immediately caught his attention. The sapphire necklace had been removed from storage. Twice. According to procedure, it should have left the vault only once before the ball. He called Mr. Collins, who signed this second authorization. The steward frowned. I didn't. The signature bears your name. It isn't mine. Adrian quietly closed the ledger. Someone had forged official records. Now the investigation became something far more dangerous than missing jewelry. It meant planning, calculation, an inside accomplice. Elsewhere in the manor, Nathaniel poured himself a glass of brandy and smiled. Everything was unfolding perfectly. The forged documents had passed unnoticed. Margaret had spread just enough whispers. The household already believed Clara was unusually curious about valuables. By tomorrow evening, no one would question where the necklace was found. They would question only why a servant had betrayed such generous employers. Nathaniel raised his glass toward his own reflection. To the perfect crime. From the hallway outside his room, unseen in the shadows, Duke Adrian happened to pass by. He heard only the final 4 words, the perfect crime. He stopped walking, slowly turned toward Nathaniel's closed door, and for the first time, his suspicion shifted away from the servants and toward his own family. The orchestra stopped playing so abruptly that the last violin note seemed to hang in the air. No one moved. No one spoke. The Duchess's sapphire necklace rested in the guard's gloved hand, having just been pulled from Clara's apron pocket. The guests stared at her with a mixture of outrage and satisfaction. For many of them, the mystery was already solved. A poor servant had stolen from the Duchess. What else was there to discuss? Only one man in the ballroom refused to accept the obvious. Duke Adrian Ashcroft. He looked from the necklace to Clara's face. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't inventing excuses. She stood pale and frightened, but there was something else in her expression. Disbelief. The look of someone trying to understand how her life had collapsed in a single heartbeat. Release her, Adrian repeated. One of the guards hesitated. Your Grace, the necklace was found. I heard what was found. His voice remained calm. What I asked was for you to release her. The guards obeyed. Clara rubbed her wrists, but did not step away. She looked as though her legs could no longer decide whether to stand or fall. Lady Beatrice frowned. Adrian, every guest in this room witnessed the evidence. No, Adrian answered quietly. They witnessed a discovery. He turned toward the assembled nobles. Those are not the same thing. The ballroom fell silent again. Years earlier, while serving as a magistrate before inheriting the dukedom, Adrian had learned a lesson that never left him. People trusted what they expected to see, not necessarily what was true. He walked toward Clara. When was the last time anyone saw Miss Bennet before the alarm? Mrs. Whitlow answered first. Nearly 20 minutes ago, Your Grace. She was arranging table settings in the west dining hall. And after that? No one knew. Adrian nodded. So for 20 minutes, no one can account for her movements. Several guests murmured. Lady Beatrice folded her arms. Exactly, Adrian continued. And no one can account for anyone else's movements either. The murmurs stopped. The Duke faced the guards. Close every entrance. Heavy wooden doors were bolted. Windows overlooking the gardens were secured. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. One nobleman protested. This is outrageous. It is inconvenient, Adrian replied. A wrongful accusation would be outrageous. The distinction silenced the room. He requested that everyone remain exactly where they had been standing when the alarm sounded. Then he began walking. Not toward Clara, toward the display case. He crouched beside the velvet stand where the necklace had originally rested. No signs of forced entry. Exactly as expected. His eyes drifted instead toward the nearby window, still locked, just as he had left it after secretly securing it days earlier. Interesting. If the thief had escaped through the garden, the window would have been opened again. It hadn't. Which meant the necklace had never left the ballroom. Adrian turned suddenly. Nathaniel. The Duchess's brother smiled pleasantly. Yes. Where were you 5 minutes before Lady Beatrice discovered the necklace missing? Nathaniel laughed. Surely you don't suspect family. I asked where you were. I was speaking with Lord Ellsworth. Lord Ellsworth nodded. For part of the evening? For all of it? The older gentleman hesitated. No. Nathaniel's smile faded only slightly. I stepped away briefly. For how long? I didn't look at a clock. The Duke asked another question. Margaret. The servant startled. Yes, Your Grace. You recommended Clara for tonight's serving rotation. I did. Why? She deserved the opportunity. You also insisted she wear a fresh apron. Margaret blinked. Yes. Where did that apron come from? She swallowed. The laundry. Mrs. Whitlow interrupted immediately. No. Every head turned. I assigned Clara a different apron this morning. Silence. Margaret's face lost its color. I thought it had become stained. So you replaced it? Yes. Adrian nodded slowly. Without permission. Margaret said nothing. Clara suddenly remembered something. Your Grace. Everyone looked toward her. When Margaret gave me the clean apron, she insisted on tying it herself. Margaret's breathing became uneven. I was only helping. Adrian stepped closer. Helping. His voice remained almost gentle. So no one saw Clara's pockets after you tied the apron? No answer. The ballroom had become so quiet that the crackling fireplace sounded deafening. Then Adrian produced something from his coat pocket, a folded ledger page. I found this yesterday. He unfolded it carefully. The inventory record authorizing a second removal of the necklace. Mr. Collins stepped forward. My signature was forged. Several guests gasped. Adrian continued. The forgery was clever. He looked directly at Nathaniel, but not perfect. Nathaniel crossed his arms. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that whoever forged the signature also misspelled one word. He held the paper higher. Authorized is written with an unnecessary flourish beneath the final letters. He looked toward Nathaniel. The same flourish appears in every letter you've written during the past year. Nathaniel's confidence finally cracked. A handwriting flourish proves nothing. When Clara reported scratches on the display case, everyone assumed someone had failed to unlock it. He paused. They were not scratches made while opening the lock. He held up the copied key. They were made while testing this duplicate. Nathaniel stared. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid. Adrian continued. I searched every room this afternoon. Nathaniel interrupted. You had no authority. I have every authority inside my own house. Another silence. In your writing desk, I found filings from recently cut brass. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. And in the fireplace. Adrian unfolded another piece of cloth. The mold used to create this copied key. The ballroom erupted. Guests whispered frantically. Several stepped away from Nathaniel as though guilt itself were contagious. Nathaniel laughed. A desperate laugh. So what? I copied a key. That isn't theft, no, Adrian answered. But planting stolen property is. Nathaniel looked toward Margaret. Only for an instant. It was enough. Adrian saw it. So did everyone else. Margaret burst into tears. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Be quiet. She shook her head violently. No, her voice broke. You promised she'd only lose her position. You promised no one would be arrested. The room exploded with shocked voices. Margaret covered her face. I hid the necklace inside the apron before the ball. I tied it myself. I did exactly what you told me. Lady Beatrice stared at her brother as though seeing him for the first time. Nathaniel. He refused to meet her eyes. Adrian's voice remained steady. Tell them why. Nathaniel stayed silent. Tell them. Finally, he did. I needed money. The confession sounded almost empty. My creditors would have ruined me. So you planned to recover the necklace later, after Clara was arrested? Nathaniel looked away. No one would question a servant. He wasn't entirely wrong. History had proven that countless innocent people had been condemned because accusing someone with less power was easier than questioning those with privilege. Across generations and societies, false accusations often followed the same pattern. Choose the person least able to defend themselves, let public opinion do the rest, and rely on the assumption that status equals credibility. Ashcroft Manor had come dangerously close to repeating that mistake. Margaret fell to her knees before Clara. I'm sorry. I was jealous. I thought everyone admired you. I thought, if you disappeared, everything would return to the way it was. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Not from anger, from heartbreak. I never wanted your position. I only wanted honest work. Margaret sobbed harder. Then something unexpected happened. Lady Beatrice stepped forward. Every guest watched. A duchess did not apologize to servants, not publicly, not ever. She stopped directly before Clara, lowered her head, and said, I wronged you. The words stunned the ballroom. I judged you before seeking the truth. She looked up. There is no excuse for that. I'm deeply sorry. No one spoke. Adrian watched his wife with quiet respect. Real dignity, he knew, was not found in never making mistakes. It was found in having the courage to admit them. The Duke faced every guest assembled inside the ballroom. Let this evening be remembered. His voice echoed through the great hall, not because jewels were stolen, but because we nearly allowed prejudice to become justice. He turned toward Clara. Miss Bennet. She looked at him uncertainly. You entered this house with nothing except your character. You leave tonight with something far more valuable, your name, and no one will ever stain it again. The guests slowly began applauding, then louder. Soon the entire ballroom stood, not for the Duke, not for the Duchess, for Clara. She had entered Ashcroft Manor as an unnoticed servant. She stood there now as a woman whose honesty had survived every attempt to destroy it. Several weeks later, Nathaniel was brought before the county court to answer for fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Margaret received a lighter sentence after cooperating fully with the investigation and making a complete confession. Though her actions had caused profound harm, the court recognized her role was manipulated by Nathaniel's scheme. Mrs. Whitlow remained at Ashcroft Manor. So did Clara. Only now, she served as the housekeeper's confidential clerk, overseeing records and inventories, precisely because everyone trusted her integrity. One autumn afternoon, Adrian found her once again arranging books in the library. You've reorganized the shelves. Clara smiled. I hope I haven't overstepped. He glanced along the perfectly ordered collection. No. As before, you were right. For the first time since arriving at the manor, she laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind that comes only after surviving something that almost broke you. Outside, the wind carried golden leaves across the gardens. Inside, peace had finally returned to Ashcroft Manor, not because evil had never entered its walls, but because truth had refused to leave them. Thank you for watching. If this story reminded you that truth can prevail even when the odds seem impossible, leave a comment with the word justice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes integrity still matters. Until our next tale, remember, a person's greatest treasure is never the jewels they wear. It's the character no lie can steal.